Welcome to NCC Unplugged, the podcast from Norman Christian Church where conversations, community, and culture converge.
Heyo! Welcome back to another episode of NCC Unplugged. I'm getting you excited and hyped up because we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic today. My name is Jeff Terpstra. I'm the preaching minister at Norman Christian Church, and I am joined by Matt Mastriani.
Hello.
He is our director of media and an ever-changing title, so we'll go with that for right now.
Sure.
And Joshua Pearsall.
Hello. Glad to be with you. It's going to be exciting.
Joshua is our executive minister here at Norman Christian Church. So we are sitting down to talk about one of the two guarantees in life. The two things that you can always bank on in life are
death
and taxes.
Yeah.
Well, you want to go a little different direction with taxes.
Yeah.
What's taxes made of?
Money.
Okay.
Money.
We are talking about money today.
I was going to say, I didn't think we were talking about death or taxes. So money, yes.
So I legitimately got a phone call just a little bit ago that my taxes are done. So it's exciting. So we are talking about money. Not only are we talking about money on this podcast, we're going to talk about money in a upcoming sermon series. And it's not a series on money. It's a series on sacrifice. In fact, coming out of Easter, we're going to be talking about the way of sacrifice according to Jesus. The Jesus way of sacrifice is specifically what it's going to be called. Here Easter, we see Jesus sacrificing his life. But I think often for him, sacrifice, an indication of sacrifice was money. Mm-hmm. In fact, here's some facts about how Jesus spoke about money. You guys ready?
Ready.
Let's go.
Okay. Ladies, you ready out there? About 1 in 10 verses in the Gospels, so not just Jesus' words, but in the Gospels, deal with money, wealth, or possessions.
Wow.
That's about 288 verses in the Gospels. 16 out of 38 parables are directly about how to handle money or possessions.
Wow.
It's a lot.
That's 42% of his parables.
I was going to say almost half.
Yes.
Yeah.
42%. So, okay, so here, 42% of his parables. So if I was a preacher and I said, look, we're going to preach a year on Jesus' parables. Mm-hmm. That's over 5 months of the year talking just about money.
Wow.
Right? So
must have been an important thing.
So is the whole idea of money being taboo, is that something that is part of our culture now that hasn't always been part of cultures?
I would think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the teachings on Jesus get abused, right? Because, okay, so here it is. So as much as Jesus talked about this, here's another. Jesus spoke more about money than heaven and hell combined.
Okay. So, I think it's just like it is so a part of daily life. And in one way you can think about money is it's just an exchange of resources. And to function in any society, you have to have the exchange of things. You have to exchange something for your food, exchange something for your transportation. And so it's interesting what it has become in our culture, and that matters. It matters how we perceive it in our culture.
Yeah. But here's I think where the difference is between what Jesus taught and a lot of the sermons people hear or the general understanding of what churches do when they speak about money. Mm-hmm. Jesus never once asked for money for himself.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't saying, hey, I need a new pair of sandals. Send in your seed offering.
Yeah.
Jesus never said, hey, the tabernacle needs a new air conditioner. We're going to pass the plate one more time. And so that's the difference, right? You already understand my tone.
Right.
I'm getting at churches that maybe you hear this from very often. And so I think that's where money can get a bad rap when it comes to the church speaking about it.
No, that makes perfect sense, because I was thinking of it just being a medium of exchange for how people live their lives, get their food, get their transportation. But when you start talking in those terms about it, about like the church requesting money or the preacher requesting money, then we're getting into that differentiation between things that are temporal and physical versus the spiritual. And we're in the spiritual business, and that interfaces with the physical, but we never want the physical to become the primary or the point.
Yeah. some people might be like, well, okay, you're in the spiritual, so why do you need my money? Why does God need my money? You're right. God doesn't need your money.
It's God's money.
Yeah, you're right. It is all God's money already to begin with. But so bring it home a little bit to NCC. It's Norman Christian Church where we're talking right now. We have not spoken about money in a long time. I think there's been one sermon series on money since I've been here. We, soon after I got here, so maybe 11 and a half years ago, we stopped passing the offering plate. Used to pass the communion plate and then pass the offering plate. We'd have a communion meditation and we'd pray. Then we'd have an offering meditation and pray and pass the offering plate. We started putting boxes on the back wall. And it took, we felt like there's so many people that are here for the first time, so many people that are not connected to God. They're here because they're searching for something. Maybe they heard the reputation of the church. So they're just coming. It's hard to pass an offering plate and not put anything in it. They felt obligated. They felt like there's just the show people are putting on, and that was never our heart behind it. But we could see how people thought that. And so we did a bit of an experiment where we put the offering. We didn't put offering plates on the wall. That would be hard to do.
That'd be interesting artwork.
Somebody built some lockable boxes to put on the back wall and to put some different places, like up in the kids area where they take an offering as well. And kind of the experiment was like, well, we'll see how this goes, right? Like if people that call NCC home, it might be a little bit harder to walk and put your offering envelope or your money in that box. But if someone's heart is in it, like they're going to do that, right? And so they found no substantial drop in the offering whatsoever. And so we've continued to do that up until this day. And so we don't talk about it because of that, right? Sometimes every once in a while we're like, hey, put your connection card in the boxes in the back with your offering and tithes, but that's like as far as we get with it. Right?
Yeah, and we didn't even have signs on them for the longest time.
Right.
It's almost like if you wanted to, and we would have people they would be a guest with us for a while, and they would go, how do you all do offering here? And where's the mysterious boxes? And so finally we put signs on it because we thought we just weren't. It just people needed to be able to find it if they're interested in it. So, and we have so many generous people in our church. It's amazing, just how God's providing for our ministry. So.
Yeah. Maybe I should say this before we go. People are curious. There's no one sitting here on this podcast that knows the amount of money that people give. Like we know the total amount,
right?
But we could never say, hey, this person in this seat gives this much, or this family gives this much this year. We've never wanted it to become, oh, well, Jeff is preaching different because he knows that family has been stingy or that family's been overly generous. Like we know there's circumstances of like, I don't know how much you make. I don't know what God is asking you to give. And so it removes that, maybe even a perceived sense of judgment, like, from even having a possibility or a foothold on my heart to see someone different because of that.
Yeah, that we would treat anybody differently, or that we would come down different on a difficult decision because a big giver feels a certain way about it. And I'm just so thankful for, that, that's, our stewardship team knows that information, but that's all. And sometimes people come up to me and they'll say, oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't been given in a few weeks. And I'm like, I had no idea, it didn't change my perception of you. I didn't have that information at all.
And the only reason the stewardship team knows is A, because they're counting, and B, they're the ones that put all the financial information together for taxes at the end of the year. I mean, that's pretty much it. So
like we have this computer software that puts the money, it attaches it to a name for tax purposes, but it's behind a locked wall. Like we don't have access to that part of the computer program and stuff like that, just in case people are like, well, how does that all work? So now we're between this place where it's like, well, Jesus speaks about this a lot and we don't, right? And so you might be like, well, I was fine with that. And I know me saying like, we're going to do a sermon series and we're going to talk about money. And that's just part of the sermon series. It's not even the full thing. There's already like tension in people's hearts. They're like, oh, here we go. Church asking for more money. We're not in a space where it's like we're having to shut off the lights or we're not paying bills. That's not why this sermon series come up. It's partly, hey, we haven't spoken on the whole counsel of God. This is part of what Jesus talks about. In fact, it's a very important part of that Jesus talks about. And so we're going to talk about it just like we talk about anything else that Jesus is passionate about. And going back to some of what you've already said, Joshua, I think, money for Jesus is an issue not because it's money, but because it displays where a person's heart is. People have said it different ways. You look at someone's bank account, you see their priorities. Right. Are they spend a whole bunch of money where? It'll show what they're most passionate about. If they're spending it all on entertainment, well, then you kind of see a person that's kind of all about themselves, right? What they want in life. If you see somebody spending it all on their family, maybe they've made their family an idol. And that's what Jesus gets into a lot is, where your heart is, where your treasure is, where you're spending your money. It's kind of a heart issue. Jesus says it this way in Matthew 6, for where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And so we can kind of see often that in our way we spend our money. So it's definitely a heart issue for Jesus. Another aspect of it is that we just live in a world that has a scarcity mindset. And so which I don't know how to even get at this. I'm like hesitating. We as a society have a worldview of money that's even different than a biblical worldview. They saw money, and I didn't mean to get in this, so I'm not fully prepared for it, but they saw money as in a scarcity mindset, but there was a limited amount. Okay. And so if Matt has more money, it automatically means I have less money because there's only so much to go around.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't typically understand money in that way. But we still have a scarcity mindset. And so we are hoarding money. We are getting money because what if? And so it comes down to a heart issue. It comes down to a trust issue. It comes down to what and who we're serving issue. Jesus says again, Matthew 26, this time verse 24, no one can serve two masters. You can't serve both God and money. And it, there's so many things that we think about when it comes to money when it's too late. Like I've never had someone that's facing the end of their life going, man, I wish I had more money. I wish I spent more money on stuff. And so to teach these things before it becomes too late, where we're like, hey, remember human connection is always going to be priority over money. Spending time with your kids is going to be better than spending money on your kids. Like they want time with you. They don't want just stuff. So stuff, things like that. And, money's only one aspect of these indications of our heart, but it really tends to be what Jesus focuses on because just like us, his first century audience, like they cared about these things deeply. And so they held on to their money. They stockpiled all that, fretted over it, worried about it. So some things that we're going to hit in our series coming up, we're going to talk about radical trust that we can have in God's provision, kind of like what you talked about, not just trusting ourselves. Often our worry about money reveals a misplaced trust. We're going to talk about how we need to be good stewards of the resources that he's already given us. Joshua, you talked about it's all God's money. And so, there's parables that Jesus talks about, like we're not meant to just hide it away and be like, well, I was afraid of what you would say. And so here I hid it in a jar and here it is. And we're meant to maybe even be daring with it and go do big things for his kingdom with that. That God doesn't necessarily measure the amount that we give, but like the cost it is to us. Talking about the widow giving her penny is all she had. And, so that, cause that can be an American thing too, where we like, we say things like we're blessed. And so we need to give back. And it kind of gets all mixed and jumbled in there sometimes, thinking it's a certain dollar amount we need to meet. So, like that, Matt, you were talking about earlier, like sometimes we say, "Oh, God bless me," thinking money wise,
Yeah.
and it shows. One, I think we think blessing only means financial,
Right.
but then if someone isn't quote unquote financially blessed, they are perceiving themselves as not blessed and favored by God.
Do they have less favor with God?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is absurd, right?
Right.
Because there's
Yep.
no indication in Scripture just because you have more money, God sees you. In fact, it's quite the opposite, I think.
Yeah.
Something about a camel and a
Yeah.
needle, and
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that'll be all different things we get into. And so I'm excited about this as we talk about sacrifice. It's, sometimes we get caught up in like, okay, 10%. And is that pre-tax? Is that post? Is this like, and that, I understand that can be a good debate. It could be, it shouldn't be a debate. It's a good thing to think, like all that. But we're missing the heart of it.
Yes.
Like the heart is sacrifice. And sacrifice is meant to hurt us because it reminds us it's not about this anyways. And so 10%, I think often is like the least amount. That gets into another misconception that all the Israelites gave in the Old Testament was 10%. 10% was only one of the offerings they gave. They gave like the temple offering, the priest, like all these different offerings and sacrifices. And so when we get back to that, like New Testament doesn't even talk about tithe, different things. We can use that as a measuring stick, but God wants our heart. He wants our life. Like he gave his son for us. And that's the way of sacrifice for Jesus. It was his very life. And so when we get into some of the details of that, I think we can lose that. And so this series is meant to bring us out of those details. We're not going to talk about 10%, 11%, 12% pre-tax, whatever. We're really going to get the heart of the sacrifice, and sacrifice can be our money. It can be our time. It can be our energy. It can be our dreams and goals for life. Like think of the person that thought they had everything in their life mapped out, and then God calls them to be a missionary, maybe not in a foreign country, but maybe in another state. Maybe their mission field is a different business opportunity and for less money. And so they went to go do that because people need Jesus Christ at that new place, and they just felt called to that. That's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so
It's a lot more than 10%.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that in this series. I'm excited about where it's going to go. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to last. It's going to really bring us to the beginning of summer. It'll be through May, maybe dip into June a little bit, but just great series to bring coming out of Easter, talking about the sacrifice of Jesus. What does that look like for you and I?
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, sacrifice has usually a little bit of a negative tone to it, and we would all admit sacrifice is not easy. But as we've seen God provide and work in our life, the scriptures lay out the principle of we're laying our lives down to take on the life that Christ has given us, and there's joy and freedom. And I was just thinking about the difference between the scarcity and the abundance mindset, and I've seen that transformation in my life, and we can make that transformation not because we have more money. We just change our mind about, and it's fun to be generous with whatever you have, and you do see God provide, and it's a lot of fun.
On the flip side of money, I think sometimes people may see it as a bargaining tool with God.
Right.
If I'm down on my luck and things aren't going right, maybe I'm not giving enough money to God. So God, if I normally give 10%, but I'm going to give you 20, and they expect to see, that increase in their, whatever they're looking for in their life. So I think people need to be careful with that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. And I think that's often where like the prosperity gospel comes in. And what I mean by that is there tends to be, sometimes online, sometimes in person, churches that really emphasize that when you come to Jesus, everything is going to be good. Your health is going to be good. Your wealth is going to be good. Your happiness is going to be good. And if it's not, then you need to do something about that, which is sometimes those bargaining chips, right? So I need to give God a little bit. I need to sow a little bit, and then I'm going to reap this harvest. And there's verses like that, but they become overemphasized or misused out of context. Because if Jesus didn't experience that, why are Jesus followers expecting to experience that? So all that, I mean, there's more and more we can get into, right? Like it just keeps going on. And so we'll talk about some of that. We probably won't be able to cover everything Jesus says, obviously, but we'll pick some parables, some scriptures.
You have a lot to pick from, apparently, right?
Yeah, really focusing on Jesus' words and how he emphasized sacrifice. So thanks, gentlemen, for this conversation. Thank you guys for listening out there. We really hope that you've come to understand our heart behind this and how we're viewing this upcoming sermon series and the different things that we'll get through. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of NCC Unplugged.
Thank you for tuning in to NCC Unplugged. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to rate and review it and share it with your friends and family. If you are interested in learning more about Norwin Christian Church, visit our website at norwinchristianchurch.com. We also invite you to join us at NCC for one of our 3 services. Sundays at 8:45 and 10:30 a.m. and Thursdays at 7 p.m. We have engaging classes for all ages, ensuring there is something meaningful for everyone in our church community. Thanks once again for listening, and we hope you have a great week.